Good evening, and welcome to a Schwalb Center program through the University of Nebraska, Omaha Schwalb Center for Israel and Jewish Studies. I'm very pleased to have a special program tonight. The last 24 hours have been a challenge for our nation, and it's wonderful to have an opportunity to celebrate the positive. Tonight, we have a young student who will be discussing his research from an independent study that he did across the last semester. I'm very pleased for those of you who do not yet know Tristan to have a chance to introduce him. Over the years, I've taught thousands of students, and I have to say that none of them have been anything like Tristan. He brings an incredible mix of skills and talents, of maturity beyond his years, and ability to address issues with great nuance, complexity. And I was not surprised that after studying the history of Zionism with me in an independent study for a semester, he chose to give a lecture on ethics. But before I give a more detailed introduction of Tristan, I'd like to say a few words that all the Schwalb Center programming is available on the Schwalb Center website. So if you have friends who missed the program tonight, or you want to see other Schwalb Center programs, you can go to our website, Schwalb Center for Israel and Jewish Studies at the University of Nebraska, Omaha, and click on those links to past videos. I'd also like to give special recognition to our founding donors, Nate and Hannah Schwalb, who had a vision to establish this center. And because of their vision, we are able to support and promote outstanding students like Tristan and provide high quality academic programming throughout the Midwest. So now I have the wonderful opportunity to say a few words about Tristan. Tristan is a religious studies major at the University of Nebraska, Omaha. He is also the president of J Connect, which is a statewide student organization that provides for the spiritual and communal needs of college-age Jews throughout the state. I particularly want to note that Tristan was recently admitted into the Nachshon Project, and I'm terribly proud of him for this achievement. The Nachshon Project is a fellowship for college-age students involved in Jewish life who want to pursue a professional career in the Jewish world. It is a highly competitive, prestigious program, and the participants usually come from Ivy League schools and elite Jewish colleges. So we are very excited to have Tristan participate through the University of Nebraska, Omaha. Through his fellowship in the Nachshon Project, Tristan will have an opportunity to institute projects at his own university, Jewish camp, and within the community. He will study Israeli history and scripture, and he will also travel to Israel to meet with a cohort of scholars and Israeli scholars and religious leaders in Israel when the COVID crisis is over. So without further ado, I'd like to hand things over to Tristan. And I know that all of you are looking forward to his presentation as much as I am.
Thank you so much, Dr. Gabriel. I want to start by saying I'm really glad to be here. I recognize a few people some people are texting me. I see some people on the Zoom, and I can just tell that I have a really good audience tonight. I'm so happy you all came. I want to start by shedding some light on why I decided to take this independent study with Dr. Gabriel and what it has done for me on both a personal and an academic level. When I first approached Dr. Gabriel in her office at the end of my spring term in 2020, I mentioned to her that I was interested in catering the upper level requirements for my religion major towards Judaic studies. I explained that I was planning on attending rabbinical school after my undergraduate, and that I wanted to take advantage of as many Jewish opportunities as I could in the meantime. Dr. Gabriel was thrilled about my plans and suggested I take some independent studies with faculty at the Schwalb Center to meet those requirements. When she asked me, "What are you interested in taking in the fall?" I think I caught her off guard with my answer, Zionism. She was probably thinking, why on earth would you want to study Zionism if you want to go to rabbinical school? All I can say is, in that moment, it just felt like it was important. What Dr. Gabriel or I probably did not know then was that this Zionism independent study was going to meet my exact needs. While in the beginning we explored various classical texts such as Herzl, Pinsker, Nordau, and Hess that described Zionist thought as a necessity for the Jewish people, we eventually made it into the writings of Rav Kook, Chaim Nachman Bialik, Ahad Ha'am, and Martin Buber, which explored the relationship between Zionism and Judaism. To me, the theme was very clear from the beginning. Zionism is an embrace of the idea of redemption. And according to Jewish Messianism, the end goal of redemption does not just apply to the Jewish people, but rather the world. As the Kabbalist Isaac Luria suggests, redemption is brought about, one, through reparative daily actions in the world, and two, the relation of those actions to the divine. This is all to say that Zionism at its very core stems from Judaism, which does not sacrifice ethics for an end goal. In various generations, especially mine, Generation Z, criticism of Israel is abundant and often scares the Jewish community. It's easy to look at those who are critical of Israel as traitors, disengaged, or Jewish failures. It feels as though Zionism for Generation Z is the belief that Israel will live up to the vision of the prophets, and that support for Israel can be critical because of what Jewish ethics calls us to advocate for. And while religiosity tends to be lower among young Jews, the values that affect how they view the Jewish state stem from what made Jews Jewish in the first place, their Judaism. It has been through this independent study that I have deepened my personal relationship to Israel on a religious level. I will always cling to my Jewish values that call for Israel to be a light unto the nations. Standing on the brink of 2021, the words of the renowned Israeli poet Yehuda Amichai still ring true today. Originally, Amichai published his piece titled Jerusalem in 1967 with reference to the capturing of the old city of Jerusalem by Israeli paratroopers. But one could very well read this poem believing it was written today. Amichai writes, "On a roof in the old city, laundry hanging in the late afternoon sunlight, the white sheet of a woman who is my enemy, the towel of a man who is my enemy, to wipe off the sweat of his brow. In the sky of the old city, a kite. At the other end of a string, a child. I can't see because of the wall. We have put up many flags, they have put up many flags, to make us think that they're happy, to make them think that we're happy." Amichai's piece is no doubt designed to be poignant. Year after year, Jews and Arabs find each other in conflict rather than coexistence, feeling as though they're living the same story over and over again. In the poem, Amichai's description, which is oriented in 67, unveils the reality of the bifurcation of people in Judea, taking the emotions of many enthusiastic Israelis and enraged Palestinians beyond mere fulfillment and malaise. Amichai no doubt wonders and wrestles with the question of whether peace is possible, rather, whether redemption is possible, not just for Jews, but for Palestinians and for all of creation. Here we are in 2021, ourselves wondering and wrestling with that very question. Whether you look at Israel's flaws or the recent events in Washington, D.C., you can tell that the rabbis of antiquity were right when they said we live in a broken world. The American painter and Shoah survivor Samuel Bach highlights the idea of a broken world, especially through the lens of the Holocaust. His work speaks to Heschel's idea that God fled the world because of the Holocaust. It is through all of this we cry out, Where is the light? For all of the world. Whether you take Amachai or Bach, they both look for peace in its entirety, not just for one side or another. Now, especially now, there needs to be a serious change, a change which moves beyond the categorical and hierarchical thinking that has usurped Zionist discussion in the past. Communities, societies, and nations around the world shore up debates about who is most deserving to dwell in Israel's land, who is most pure, who is most valued, who is most authentic, who should dominate and who should be controlled, who is consecrated with God's blessing, and who is destined to be cursed. While all of humanity does this oh so frequently in every aspect of life, the reminder from the tradition most powerfully in the Ne'ilah service for Yom Kippur begs Tzitipah Yeshua to hearken to salvation and tells us that the end goal of redemption is that perfect world for all. Sim shalom ba'alam tova bracha. The embrace of Zionism as an equalizer for the Jewish people and the rest of the world is very much a reminder of human dignity. The idea, so Jewishly rooted, remembers those who were laid low and cast out from society because God sees no divisions that man has made. Al tistacho b'kankan ela b'mashet techo. Do not look at the vessel, look at what's on the inside. Just as the prophet Samuel was instructed to seek out the anointed by looking at the heart and beyond the physical, so too do we try to remember, applying to all, attributes such as fairness, kindness, and love throughout Zionism in the next generation. The Israel of today is definitely not what Theodor Herzl, the father of modern Zionism, envisioned for the Jewish people. Herzl thought the Jewish people would bring some sort of peace and security to the Middle East. It was one of the primary reasons why Palestine was chosen for the state, rather than other options such as Argentina and Uganda, notwithstanding the fact that Jews have always been tied to Eretz Israel. However, there is no doubt that the early leaders of the Zionist movement were prepared to sacrifice parts of the Jewish past in order to build the Jewish future. Since the time of the Exodus, Jews around the world knew the profound nature of redemption in the model that it served for other people. In the late 1960s, Golda Meir noted, when African nations were being liberated from the jackboot of imperialism, it was the duty of Jews to stand with them in their struggle out from darkness and into light. She understood full well that true redemption was not going to happen overnight. Redemption is a process that is constantly happening, and one we have to assume requires hard work, constantly. Whether it be for the Jewish people or for another, striving for excellence is at the core of Zionism and is going to resurface throughout Generation Z. Max Nordau, the co-founder of the World Zionist Congress, came from an Orthodox family, albeit he became secular later in life. Nordau's goal was to establish a new sort of Jew, different from that of the pogroms, what he called muscle Jews, refusing to be the studious, text-based victims on call any longer. Similarly, it was the great Jewish poet Chaim Nachman Bialik who published El Hatzipor, or To the Bird, in 1892, which documented the horrors Jews faced from pogroms throughout Eastern Europe. To the Bird drew from religious sentiments like Isaiah and Esther and focused on the Kishinev pogrom, not as an event, but as a condition that would continue to follow the Jewish people so long as they remained in Europe. Both Nordau and Bialik very early on called for some sort of change in Jewish character. This was all, of course, in response to the blatant anti-Semitism and harm against Jews that usurped European society. Upon the emancipation of Jews throughout Europe towards the turn of the 19th century, newly released Jews from the shtetl found themselves succeeding throughout the continent. German Jews in disproportionate numbers to the population found themselves woven into the fabric of the European elite in relatively a short period of time. The hate that came from this liberation, such as the 1882 publishing of Eugen Düring's The Jewish Problem as a Problem of Race, Morals, and Culture, alarmed Zionist thinkers and Jews alike. Düring attempted to anti-Semitically attack the Jewish people on an intellectually rooted basis, which powerfully resonated with Europeans throughout Western Europe. This led many Jews to fear bearing the label of their Jewish identity. Many tried to change themselves, often unsuccessfully. The outside, no matter what, was always going to look at a Jew as a Jew. More alarmingly, many thought if someone like Düring was going to do this sort of damage as an intellectual, imagine what thugs could do or say. Anti-Semitism no doubt came throughout Europe in all sorts of manifestations. Consequently, waves of Aliyah to the Yishuv helped build a sanctuary amidst a Jewish people in crisis. And years later, the Israeli declaration would call for the Jewish people everywhere to both literally and figuratively upbuild Israel and the dream of redemption, according to the Rock of Israel. Years later, this idea of conditional support for the state of Israel became popular and prominent among many Jewish leaders in the diaspora, starting in the 1950s. Whether they be political thinkers like the American Jewish Committee's Jacob Blaustein, who argued support can only occur if Israel is aligned with Jewish values, or religious leaders like Rabbi John Rayner, who called for a cheshbon nefesh, or a recounting of the soul, for those so infused with the end goal of acquiring land and dismissive of the means. Each thought to dissect the idea of Zionism as a monolith and cultivate a new Zionist image for their generation. They would not play apologetics, and they would not stand idly by when sight was lost of what was important. Here marks the point in the presentation where the focus moves from the historic to the future. Historically, the condition of the Jewish people was full of suffering, a consequence of galut, or exile. But Jewish tradition has taught that the world can be better, can always be lighter. That is me'en olam haba. That is the cause of the Jewish people. While we are in the process of redemption because we have Medinat Yisrael, the modern state of Israel, there is still so much work to do in making the world a better place. Understanding that Israel has not reached its fullest potential on moral grounds means we are retaining the ethical Jewish values which inspired the idea of a Jewish home in the first place. This signifies and re-emphasizes the idea of conditional Zionism, which is surfacing in my generation, Generation Z. According to an academic journal titled Young American Jews in Israel, Beyond Birthright and BDS, published by Professor Dev Waxman at UCLA, young American Jews are not more detached and disconnected from Israel than their predecessors, but are more critical of the Israeli government and its policies, and are sympathetic more so than Palestinians, or sympathetic towards Palestinians more so than older Jewish Americans. In Judaism, it is no small thing that 36 times throughout the Hebrew Bible, we are told to remember the widow, the orphan, and the stranger. Additionally, it was Ramban who said, remember the bond of humanity between you. Move beyond hatred and difference. Safeguarding Jewish values and calling on this Jewish state, which is ours, to be morally upright, is the only way that it can truly be that light unto the nations. Daniel Gordis writes in his book, Israel, A Concise History of a Nation Reborn, that Zionism was commonly viewed in America with an all or nothing approach. You either support Israel or you don't. You're either on our side, the Jewish side, or you're a traitor. Israel still has so many adversaries and needs all the support that it can get. There is no room to be critical of a country when the means are necessary to the ends. But to that, Judaism says, oh really? Judaism, though, understands that the means by which something is done has always been important. The debate about the ends and means has been wrestled with and debated throughout Hebrew scriptures. You can look to Abraham contemplating God's promises to him in return for various sacrifices, to Jacob tricking Isaac out of Esau's birthright, or even Talmudic debates about what constitutes the completion of a mitzvah. Torah is not teaching emulation, but rather these examples are teaching critical thinking to be applied to real life. What is Zionism for Generation Z? Perhaps it's a more mature and rethought framework that subscribes to Jewish ethics that has been embedded in world Jewry's culture. Perhaps a Zionist truly holds the Jewish state accountable to its representation of the Jewish people, to the values from the tradition that Jewish would perpetuate the individual. When the Jewish state truly feels that the moral pressure is on, then Torah can truly flow forth from Zion. Is that all it would take for Israel to succeed and find peace? Will plainly having a more just Jewish state bring about the Israel that was longed for? It would be naive to think so. Certainly Herzl aspired to create a sort of Jewish utopia that would end anti-Semitism through the establishment of a Jewish state. It's very easy to read throughout Newland or Old Newland and think Israel would be an international equivalent of a strong European nation. Herzl imagined that other nations of the world would be in awe of Jewish accomplishments and bonding over their humanity. The credence that Jews would be loved by the world once they were in their own state proved impossible very early on, most famously in Hitler's Mein Kampf, which fantastically claimed that Jews would try to take over the world through Israel. These sorts of tropes are still present today. Israeli politician Natan Sharansky has highlighted throughout his career that Israel and Zionism are always under attack, a lot of the time unjustifiably. This sparked the coinage of the term, the 3Ds of anti-Semitism, one which any Jewish person ought to understand, especially in our day: the delegitimization of Israel, the demonization of Israel, and the double standards for Israel. Sharansky wrote, "For thousands of years, Jews were demonized. They were charged with blood libels, with poisoning wells, and later with controlling the global banking system. The Jewish faith and claim to nationhood was delegitimized, and double standards were applied to Jews, either through the imposition of special laws from the Middle Ages in Europe to the Russian Empire and Nazi Germany, or through de facto government policy discriminating against Jews." Sharansky further goes on to evidence the ways in which movements like the Boycott, Divestment, Sanctions movement, or BDS, has gone to perpetuate old anti-Semitic ideas in a new framework. He cites more than 80 anti-Semitic caricatures which have emerged from the BDS movement since its founding in 2005. On the other side, conservative politicians like the newly elected North Carolina representative, Madison Cawthorn, call on Jews to be proselytized before the rapture, and former Georgia Senator David Perdue changed the appearance of Senator John Ossoff's nose. These tropes and ideas are parallel to anti-Semitic propaganda from the past. I am a firm believer that anti-Semitism does not belong to one political party or another. It exists in different, dangerous forms on both sides and has to be called out and fought equally. I bring this up because this idea of redemption is constantly hindered because of anti-Semitism. And it feels as though Israel has been intertwined in this process. We can all remember learning about how the shooter at the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh a little over 2 years ago expressed disdain for Jewish organizations like Hias, who welcome the stranger and protect the refugee. Hias recognizes the parallels Jews faced in the past and many others still face today. There are people plainly trying to achieve a better life amidst the ugliness of this world. It would be safe to say that the anti-Semitism that surrounds supporting a Jewish state is not going away anytime soon. It can get better, God willing, but gearing up to defend the crux of Zionist ideals while simultaneously calling out a potentially erroneous future Israel is going to be a task full of serious effort. Anti-Semitism will no doubt be experienced in that process. Unfortunately, throughout the bulk of Jewish history, there have always been those so maligned against us. We have to be realistic. And while we have focused significantly on the historical approaches to Zionism and the barriers of Zionism that are on the outside, we need to look at serious divisions that exist within the Jewish community. Zionists in Generation Z are being confronted with ever-changing dynamics of the Jewish community. The Pew Research Center recently reported that Jews of color make up nearly 700,000 Jews in the United States. It is going to be the task of Zionists in Generation Z to figure out where Jews of color play into the idea of a Jewish state, or more plainly, an American Jewry. That meaning, to focus on how Jewish identity is expanding beyond the realms it has permeated in the past in the United States. In essence, white Ashkenazim. That meaning, Jewish identity is moving beyond Ashkenormative thinking. Throughout the development of Israeli Jewry, this question has remained prominent since the arrival of countering Jewish sects. Even in our own American setting, the arrival of Polish and other Eastern European Jews clashed with previously settled German Jews, causing many German Jews to look at Polish Jews thinking, oh no, we aren't the same. So this too has to be the trend all too many Ashkenazi and Sephardic sects of society see. It was Stanford research associate Dr. Deborah Guggenheimer's study titled Unity and Invisible Identities toward an intersectional analysis of Israeli society, which noted that Israeli divisions tend to be in dualities or black and white issues. And while it is true, very true that much of the country is unified Jewishly, caste-like ideals still weigh in the back of the minds of many Israelis who harbor attitudes from their prior diaspora-rooted lives. This, though, is not necessarily new information. Sociologists Noah Lewin-Epstein and Yinon Cohen published data in 2019, which recorded nearly half of Israel as being made up of non-white citizens, coming primarily from the Middle East and Northern Africa. As the number of non-white Jews around the world in diaspora continue to grow, tensions do as well. Assuming that trends of the Jewish past continue, for example, seeing Ashkenazim as a total group, rather than separate sects such as German, Polish, Russian, and etc., then Jews in the future should just be seen as Jews. At some point, it should be less of an issue whether someone has one Jewish parent or two, whether someone is Reform, conservative, and perhaps Orthodox, or whether someone is a Jew of color or not. The boundaries of Jewish identity are expanding and should help modernize thinking about what it means to be a Zionist. This all helps to illustrate the idea that the Jewish experience is diverse and nuanced, and is becoming more so in the Jewish state. New perspectives are being brought to the tables as old ideas start to fade and new identities start to emerge. On the other side, Daniel Gordis goes on to magnify the issue of race and religion by looking at how some differences unproductively anchor Israeli society down. Groups like the Shas, the religious and political party for Haredi, Sephardic, and Mizrahi Jews against secular Ashkenazi Israelis, highlight the ineptitude of Israeli society to merge together over their shared Jewishness. This is because there are irreconcilable differences at both their cores. That dynamic does not appear to be changing anytime soon, especially in Generation Z's time. Nevertheless, we can assume that just as Jews have come together throughout history, they will continue to do so to some degree in the future. However, saying that all Jews will link arms and merrily exist together is ignorant of extreme attitudes among Jews on both sides. It's the job of Zionists and Generation Z to build as many bridges as possible on both sides for the strength of the Jewish people. Anti-Semitism and external sources have long put the onus of being a Jew on Jews forcibly. So long as there is an outside against the Jewish people, Jews will band together when necessary. The great Simeon ben Zoma said, "Who is wise? One who learns from every human being." It feels as though, now more than ever, Jews in Generation Z are truly out to seek understanding of the other side. That understanding, in turn, deepens the meaning of what it means to be a Zionist in 2021. All too often, we approach the conversation surrounding Israel and the future of the Jewish community with our own Jewish ethics and values in hiding. In a time when talking about Israel feels a whole lot like playing with fire, it's worth the discussion to unveil our own personal attitudes that have taken the forefront and perhaps even dominated our viewpoints. It's my greatest hope that my generation acknowledges what has been hidden and makes it revealed so that we can, God willing, truly watch the dream of Zionism from the prophets come to fruition. Israel has always been destined to serve as a beacon of light, and it's our job to make it so. I want to thank you all so much for attending my presentation tonight. Before I conclude, I do want to take the opportunity to thank Dr. Gabriel for working with me this past semester. It's really been a privilege to have you as a mentor and have you a part of the Schwalb Center's faculty. Lastly, I want to thank everyone at the Schwalb Center for allowing me to pursue this opportunity tonight and articulate my vision for the Jewish future. I appreciate it so, so much.
Thank you, Tristan. That was fascinating. You laid out so many complex ideas building from a historical examination of Zionism. I want to take this opportunity to follow up on a few key points that you raised. You talked about Generation Z developing a conditional Zionism that safeguarded Jewish values. I just want to comment how exciting it is to see how you are able to take the literature, develop your own argument and vision for the future, and support it so forcefully. You raised throughout your presentation the issue of the diversity and complexity, both in terms of identity and thought within the Jewish community and the Jewish state. And I'm wondering if you can speak to whether you see this complexity as being a source of strength or a source of weakness?
I like that question a lot because I think it can go both ways. It is worth saying that right now, especially, that tends to be a weakness in terms of Jewish unity. Those sorts of differences that exist on both sides, whether they be racial, religious, whatever. In the future, that's only going to strengthen the Jewish people, because as the rest of the world changes, so too does the Jewish people need to, while also retaining the core value, those ethics that has made the Jewish people what they are. If that sort of answers the question.
It's a difficult question that I think the whole Jewish world is grappling with. So it's an admirable answer. I also wanted to address, I think, one of your most powerful points, which is suggesting that an argument that the means justify the ends is antithetical to the core ethics of Judaism. I wonder if you can speak about that a little further. I realize I'm throwing you a blind question here that we didn't prepare, but I know you're up for it because I think this is such a powerful point that perhaps is your deepest point of conflict with the generations before you.
Yeah, I think that point of like what constitutes something being justifiable, I guess. It's not new. It stems way back from the times of the Torah, but I think whether or not we're looking in Generation Z to the particular Jewish text, I think that the idea that no, the means don't, the ends don't justify the means. I think that actually is resurfacing because that's embedded in world Jewry, in that sort of culture. As far as like particular, examples go, I'm drawn to like the Talmud and like what does constitute the completion of like a mitzvah? Like what does it count if you say the Shema if you don't fully concentrate during it? I mean, those sorts of things, we say, we give a degree of leeway for that, but in this particular case, for Israel, we say that you can't be immoral, you can't go against what the bulk of the tradition is calling the Jewish people to do. And I think that's pretty profound that we're able to say that in Generation Z, and that's what we're seeing throughout social media. It's for the good of the Jewish people, and I think it's going to allow those sorts of ideas that come from Ahad Ha'am and Rav Kook, like that the Jewish state can actually be Jewish in religion as well.
Then finally, I'd like to address your core point of redemption, which is such a strong way to address the importance of Zionism and also, in a sense, challenge to do better, to be better, to strive for better. And we've gone through a very challenging period of a global rise in anti-Semitism, which you speak to so powerfully, and yet counter that we cannot make decisions solely through the lens of an anti-Semitism that will always exist. But I love the way you wove in the fact that this is what binds the complexity of identities of the Jewish people together. I'm wondering if you can address sort of a core point that ties to redemption as to what do you see as the core tenet of Zionism? Is it about the nation of Israel, or is it about Jewish ethics? Or is it something more complex than both of those two things?
That's a really good question, but I actually think it does go beyond the two of those points. I think that Zionism, although at least in the 1800s, it was more of a political movement because a lot of the founders of Zionism tended to really just be invested in the politics, not so much the religious aspects, albeit they came from very religious backgrounds. And I think like the fact that we're able to take those points about redemption from politics, you know, wanting to see the condition of someone be better, how we can apply that to ourselves and apply it to others. I think that's really the core of Zionism, is that not only should we have our own land because Israel is the only Jewish state, it's this idea that other people should be able to create those sorts of societies as well.
Excellent. Thank you, Tristan. I'm sure all of you who are attending this presentation tonight will agree with me in applauding Tristan for his remarkable work. And we're really looking forward to what he's able to accomplish through the Nachshon Project as he brings back his projects and resources into the community, and through his future study at UNO. So I'd like to thank all of you for joining us this evening, and to look forward to seeing you at future Schwalb Center programs. The next one will be next week at this time, where we're having Dr. Mays, Judaic Studies professor from the University of Michigan, speak about Sephardic migration. So I look forward to seeing you all soon, and thank you very much for joining us tonight. Thank you very much, Tristan.